Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. It gives me enormous pleasure to see your sustained commitment to the Cosmos Foundation and your continued interest in our activities as our valued friends. This happy fact is reflected in your presence in such numbers at our event today. Indeed, it is our aspiration to convert the Friends of Cosmos into some kind of a club, informal club if I may add, where our deliberations will imbue our members with a deeper understanding of how we as a nation do and should relate to region and the world beyond. I bid you all a very, very warm welcome. I wish to thank in particular our distinguished speaker this morning, High Commissioner Benoit Prefontaine of Canada. He will speak on a topic that is close to the heart of each one of us here, and that's Bangladesh-Canada relations. We are deeply grateful for the presence here of Foreign Secretary Shahidul Haq as chief guest. Recently, I had seen him and heard him at the South Asian Diaspora Convention in Singapore. His remarks there were widely acclaimed. We from Cosmos Foundation owe him a special debt of gratitude for the active support he has always continued to render us. But before we move on to the subject on hand, I wish to keep the Friends of Cosmos up to date with regard to our activities of our foundation in the immediate past and the plans we have on offer for you in the near future. This is in line with what usually I do on each and every such occasion. Since our very successful interaction with Lord Mark Malloch-Brown, former UK Minister and the UN Deputy Secretary General, in October, the Foundation actively participated in a very major event in Singapore, the South Asian Diaspora Convention. It is organized every 2 years by the Institute of South Asian Studies, ISAS, a prestigious think tank in Asia's foremost university, National University of Singapore. As you know, the convention conferred the Outstanding Member of the Diaspora Award to Sir Fazle Hossain Abed, Emeritus Chairman of BRAC. At that conference, I was privileged to share the podium with renowned captains of industry of our region and speak on the opportunities and challenges in Bangladesh. At that event, considerable focus was devoted to Bangladesh and its burgeoning significance. We hope to begin our activities of 2020 by hosting a very senior European statesman on the 11th of January 2020. He is the former president of Slovenia, Dr. Danilo Turk, who is also currently active in the academia as well. He will speak on the role of Europe in the current global scene and the potentialities of its collaboration with countries such as Bangladesh. Through this period, at some point, we hope to launch a book entitled South Asia in the Contemporary World that we have recently published. It is an anthology of essays on regional politics on a global matrix, a must-read for those interested in international relations. It has been authored by the renowned scholar diplomat Dr. Iftikhar Chaudhry, Principal Research Fellow at ISAS, Singapore, and former foreign advisor. Down the line, we plan on holding events on thematic issues pertaining to foreign policy. A subject we have in mind is values and the impact of values have in policy formulation. We shall keep you apprised of the schedule in due course and invite all interested in diplomacy to attend and participate. Now to turn to the event this morning for which we are all gathered. I know all will join me in offering felicitations to High Commissioner Prefontaine for the recent successful holding of elections in Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been returned to office, which would, one can safely assume, signal a continuity of policies, including with regards to foreign affairs. We remain confident that Bangladesh-Canada relations that began in 1972 will keep expanding in every sphere. Today, it spans across a broad spectrum of development cooperation, trade and investment, and people-to-people linkages. We have well over, I would say, 200,000 Bangladeshis who have made Canada their home and have been involved with activities that are rewarding to both the countries. I myself witnessed to the warmth of our welcome in Canada as I spent long periods of time fruitfully, happily in that beautiful country of a gracious nation. We're delighted that Canada is represented here by a person of such experience and eminence as High Commissioner Benoit Prefontaine. He studied economics in both universities of Montreal and Ottawa and have been in government since 1987. He has served in the headquarters and in posts in such faraway places as Cote d'Ivoire, Japan, India, Brazil, and now Bangladesh. And I'm thankful to him for his deep interest in sharing his time with us this morning. As in the past, we are beholden to Dr. Iftikhar Chaudhry for being with us. He flew in from Singapore last night just to attend this conference. And without any further delay, I would request Dr. Chaudhry to take over.
Thank you, Anath. Foreign Secretary, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. Anath, I owe you a debt of gratitude, actually, for lightening my task load by your introduction of High Commissioner Benoit Prefontaine. I should be remiss, though, if I were not to add that my own brief interactions with our speaker over the past few months in my brief visits to Dhaka has left me deeply impressed as to his prodigious capabilities. We were planning this event earlier, but needed to wait the holding of the 43rd elections in Canada. The smooth manner in which it was held deserves plaudits. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is back in office, and the received wisdom, as you have heard, is that we expect a degree of continuity with regard to policies, and that includes foreign policy. Bangladeshis view him as a friend, just as we did his father, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who has been posthumously awarded the Friend of Bangladesh Liberation Honor Award. Many of us recall with warmth, fondness, and a degree of nostalgia the visit of Justin Trudeau as a boy, accompanying his father to Dhaka, perhaps as an 11-year-old, in November 1983. I would like to make a few remarks on the subject at hand, as I'm wont to do in such circumstances. But before that, I feel I need to express my delight in having Foreign Secretary Shahidul Haq adorn the chair of our chief guest. I've had the pleasure of having him as a colleague for many years, at the middle of his diplomatic career and towards the end of mine. He's a person of stupendous skill and capabilities, and also having served as a top-drawer international civil servant, a solid rock source of inspiration for all his officers at the MFA. Recently, as Inayat had told you, that at the ISA's flagship event, Diaspora Convention was held in Singapore, and Shahid made some excellent contribution that immensely added to our takeaways from that event. Back to the substance of the day. Canada has had a foreign policy through decades that often appear to the observer as having a remarkable consistency. Much of it comes from geostrategic compulsions and having a larger and a more powerful immediate neighbor with whom, and this phrase is important, it must live in concord with but distinct from. Pierre Trudeau once said, living next door to the United States is like sleeping with an elephant, because no matter how friendly and even-tempered the beast, one is affected by every twitch and grunt. In these relations, Canada has always sought to ensure a modicum of mutual interdependence, one that involves give and take. So, does Canada's behavior pattern in the region provide a paradigm of sorts of relations between smaller and middling powers with larger and stronger neighbors? In other words, do we in Bangladesh have lessons to take in this regard? We live at a time when the global order, as we have known for decades, appears to be breaking down. Multilateral institutions like the United Nations and the World Trade Organization that provided a rules-based global matrix for states to relate to one another are under threat. Canada and Bangladesh share the belief that countries must work together to preserve the framework, albeit with reforms, that has given us peace, stability, and development for so long. Our excellent bilateral relations are a testimony to those shared values. These have spanned across socio-economic issues, trade and investment, health, education, climate change, and also defense cooperation. It merits stating that Canada has been a source of great support to Bangladesh on the Rohingya crisis from the very beginning. The Bangladeshi diaspora finds in Canada a congenial home. So, in today's world, distance is no impediment to friendship and cooperation, provided there is empathy and understanding, as exist between our two nations. Think tanks such as the Cosmos endeavor to help build and buttress a web of such positive interactions. The purpose is to seek the fruition of our objectives of a better quality of life for all of us. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Foreign Secretary Hack, organizers of this Ambassador's Lecture Series, Excellencies, friends, it's a great pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this month's lecture. And to speak out about Canada-Bangladesh relations, which is something in the last week I've discovered becomes more difficult the longer one stays in a country. As strange as this may sound, this is one of the first opportunities for me to comment on the whole breadth of our bilateral relationship, because until now I've typically been participating in events where the focus was narrower. And so there's a lot of choosing of what I will raise today that had to be done, because the list was long. Our relations, as was mentioned by the chairman, date back to Bangladesh's independence war of 1971, when the then Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau came forward speaking in favor of Bangladesh Liberation War at the international level, then in recognizing Bangladesh immediately after its independence. Since Canada gave official recognition to the People's Republic of Bangladesh, we had hopes of building and enduring relationships based on shared values of democracy, good governance, human rights, pluralism, and freedom of speech. Today, 48 years later, our relationship has become deep and multidimensional. It cuts across so many aspects of human endeavor and across multiple sectors. It is increasingly multifaceted and can shift from one area to another as circumstances evolve. And this is exactly what I have witnessed during my first 2 years in Dhaka. But there are a few constants. The people-to-people links between Canada and Bangladesh are significant and increasingly so. The Bangladeshi Canadian community is estimated at over 100,000 and continues to make significant contributions to Canadian prosperity and to the multicultural fabric of my country, Canada. Likewise, the growing number of Bangladeshi students who studied in Canada makes a significant contribution to this country's economy and society when they return, and most do. I am sure that if I do a quick survey, even in this room, I would find quite a few Canadian alumni or a few of you whose children are studying in Canada. Even after 2 years in Bangladesh, I still discover past and current linkages, areas of collaboration, and connections between people or institutions that I wasn't aware of. My colleagues and I at the Canadian High Commission often feel overwhelmed by the need to nurture and maintain all of these connections, while at the same time trying to rethink our bilateral relationship, address missed opportunities between our countries, and try to keep it modern and relevant. This brings me to today's theme, Bangladesh-Canada relations, prognosis for the future. As a career diplomat, I was trained long ago to always ask myself two basic questions when I'm assigned to a new country. Since arriving in Bangladesh, I have therefore been asking me the following two questions. Why does Canada matter to Bangladesh? And why does Bangladesh matter to Canada? I'll therefore begin by summarizing for you some of my thoughts on these two questions, because they'll provide the underpinnings for the final portion of my remarks, which is my prognosis for the future. So, why does Canada matter to Bangladesh? This is always the most difficult part because it's based largely on what people tell us and our interpretation of what people really feel. I've noticed because I'm a high commissioner, people tend to be very polite when they tell me what they think. So I have to try to fill in a lot of blanks. But here are a few of the things I've gathered since I arrived in Bangladesh. First of all, I am very conscious of the fact that Canada is far away. It's cold, it's expensive. It's one of the most difficult places for which to obtain a visa for Bangladeshis, I'm told regularly. But that being said, a lot of people in this country are aware that Canada is one of its main development partners. I keep being told that over the years we have funded over $4 billion of projects since independence. We also have a long history of providing scholarships and supporting capacity building for the government, for NGOs, for civil society, and this has given us a lot of access to many people and a corporate memory, I would say, of a lot of the things that have happened in Bangladesh over the decades, which are important today. Bangladesh is also an important market I'm jumping ahead here. Canada is also an important market for Bangladesh. All of your exports enter my country duty-free. They are growing significantly year after year. The trend is upward and constant. You now have a very significant trade surplus with Canada. And so I know this is important for Bangladesh, and there is no problem with that. If there is a problem, it's more with the lack of effort being made by Canadians to be active in Bangladesh. I also want to mention just not a day goes by without some people telling me that they would like to immigrate to Canada, that they would like to send their children to study in Canada. And I know it's not everyone who can afford to do that, and it's not always easy, but I always see it as a very positive sign that there's something going on in Canada that's useful for Bangladesh, that has value for the people. I keep being told that we're now the destination of choice. I'm not sure what exactly that means, but I see it very positively. And I will come back to this when I'm speaking about my prognosis for the future. I think Bangladeshis also recognize that Canada has a multicultural and inclusive society. Our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has a surprisingly large following in this country. Everybody knows more than I do what he tweeted today, and which surprises all of the Canadians who are here in our High Commission, the amount of interest in our Prime Minister. And they do know that he promotes gender equality, human rights. And I think this is one of the reasons, aside from his appearance perhaps, why he is so popular here. I would be interested in if any of you have comments on why Canada matters to your country. It's something I keep asking, and as I said, I get very polite answers, but I still do not fully understand, for a small country so far away, why there is this infatuation almost with Canada. It's excellent that it happens. I just don't understand all of it. I will now turn to the next question I have been asking myself since arriving in Bangladesh, which is why this country, Bangladesh, matters to Canada. So this is a category that's much easier for me to explain because I'm constantly writing about it to my headquarters. Some of the reasons I will mention might seem a bit far-fetched for you, but don't underestimate the importance of the things I will mention in what motivates my countrymen and my government when they think of Bangladesh. Number one is your democratic and secular constitution. One of the ways in which Bangladesh has really stood out since its independence and is its commitment to remaining a democratic and secular state. In Canada, we know that democracy can get messy, and it comes with challenges. It's not easy for political forces to live up to the ideals of democracy and secularism, but we're convinced that Bangladesh made the right choice and that its people will benefit from this. This is also why Canada has engaged extensively with civil society groups, think tanks, the media, all of which have an important role to play in Bangladesh. Number two is multilateralism. And I go back to the analogy of one of my former prime ministers about sleeping in the same bed as an elephant. As Canadians, we see our country as a middle power in a world often dominated by larger powers. Our preference, therefore, is to have strong rules-based international frameworks. We see Bangladesh as another middle power country with which we're able to collaborate in multilateral fora to advance a rules-based world order. Canada and Bangladesh frequently work together in the United Nations, the Commonwealth, or the World Trade Organization, for example. Bangladesh knows and understands the value of working through multilateral bodies on topics such as the 2030 Agenda, the Global Compact on Migration, or on crucial issues such as climate change. A third reason why Bangladesh matters a lot to us is about what your country is doing when it comes to peacekeeping operations. Although our two countries are quite distant geographically, Canada and Bangladesh enjoy a cooperative and productive defense relationship stemming largely from our many interactions on UN peacekeeping missions over the years. Point number 4, women, peace, and security. This is a big priority in my country. The women, peace, and security agenda is at the heart of Canada's feminist foreign policy, which includes the feminist international assistance policy and our defense policy. Bangladesh has been supportive of the relevant UN Security Council resolutions and by ensuring a greater role for women in peacekeeping, peace building, disaster management, prevention of violence against women, and preventing violent extremism, among others. Point number 5, development cooperation. With over $4 billion contributed here by Canada since 1972, Bangladesh has been one of my country's largest aid recipients for decades. Today, through our feminist international assistance policy, Canada's international development assistance in Bangladesh is focused on basic education, employment skills, primary health care, and improving governance. And I should add that Bangladesh is among the countries where our development projects have historically been the most successful. In the last 15 years, with a limited resource base, Bangladesh has witnessed one of the fastest reductions in poverty anywhere in the world. This is well understood in Canada and appreciated. It also says a lot about the dedication of our partners in Bangladesh. At the moment, we're very active in Bangladesh in a number of areas, and I'll just mention a few. Maternal and newborn health services, nutrition for women, adolescents, children and newborns, access for women to quality education and safe working conditions, particularly in the RMG sector. Segue into point number 6, which is the ready-made garment sector. Since the Rana Plaza tragedy, Canadians have become acutely aware of the working conditions in some of the factories in Bangladesh. In fact, some of the Rana Plaza victims were producing garments destined for the Canadian market at the time of the building's collapse. This was a shock for many Canadians. Whether they are customers, retailers, humanitarian activists, many Canadians feel strongly that we have an obligation to help improve the situation. Along with Bangladesh, the EU, and the USA, this is why Canada became a signatory to the Sustainability Compact, an international initiative dedicated to improving the safety of workers in the RMG sector. Despite the progress made to date on improving working conditions in Bangladesh factories, more work remains to be done, and we continue to urge all industry stakeholders to comply with international standards and conventions. At the same time, we know that it's imperative for the Bangladesh RMG sector to grow and succeed, because Bangladesh's economy and millions of jobs, the majority of which are for women, are at stake. So this is another area where Bangladesh matters a lot to Canada and Canadians. The 7th point is one which I hesitated to include. It's the Rohingya crisis. And I hesitated because I don't want this to be perceived that it's overtaking our bilateral relations. It's one of the many files we work on together with Bangladesh and others. But you know, the bottom line is that Canada recognized the immense generosity that the people and government of Bangladesh have demonstrated in welcoming Rohingya refugees and in keeping their borders open to those seeking refuge. When I was saying earlier that some what I say might seem like a bit of a stretch or exaggeration, this is one where I always want to tell people this is huge for us. it's not just words that are convenient to say. In Canada, we have a special envoy, Bob Ray, who is very active. When I visit Canada, all I hear about is why aren't you doing more to help the Rohingya and to help Bangladesh? So this is huge in our bilateral relationship right now. I hope it's a temporary file, but as long as this is playing out, it will hold a big place in what we're doing here. Canada was one of the first countries to respond to the crisis, continues to be a top humanitarian donor. We place crucial importance on addressing the urgent needs of crisis-affected populations in Cox's Bazar, both refugees and those living in the affected host communities. And we fully agree that the causes and solutions to the crisis lie in Myanmar. And this is why we're using all tools at our disposal to help, and this includes sanctions against Myanmar leaders and companies, as well as diplomatic efforts around the world. Canada's long history of helping and welcoming refugees. Our own citizens deeply care about what the Rohingya and Cox's Bazar host communities are going through. Point number 8 has to do with the prevention of terrorism. The security of Canada is linked to other states. As everyone knows, preventing and responding to terrorism or transnational crime requires resources, expertise, and partners. Canada will continue to engage constructively with regional, bilateral, and multilateral partners in driving positive action on global issues such as strengthening global peace and security operations. Bangladesh is a key partner in that approach because of your strategic geopolitical location, your embrace of multilateralism, and your zero tolerance for terrorism. Point number 9 is the rapid economic growth of this country. The fact that a country with such a large population is emerging as the fastest growing economy in Asia is another reason why Bangladesh matters to more and more Canadians. One of your Honorable Prime Minister's priorities is to create jobs through investment and trade. And there's a growing number of Canadians becoming interested in Bangladesh business opportunities. So on this note, I will now turn to the final part of my remarks and share thoughts on my prognosis for the future. From my perspective, the Bangladesh-Canada bilateral relationship is on a sound footing. There are certainly issues on which we collaborate and agree more easily than on others, but the overall dialogue is always constructive and frank. The main building blocks were laid long ago, so one of my priorities during my tenure here is to preserve those good relationships because they benefit both countries. I have not spoken for some time with my good friend, the High Commissioner of Bangladesh in Canada, but I believe that he also shares that view. I'd like to conclude by flagging 3 areas where I expect our relationship to evolve. Some are prompted by opportunities, others, in order to mitigate threats. So the first one has to do with trade. Not just trade, but trade, investment, collaboration on science, technology, the full gamut of all the commercial, business-related relations that Canada has in so many other countries, but not yet in Bangladesh. It's really focused on merchandise trade here. I expect a continued growth in our commercial relationship. Bangladesh's economic growth and the need to industrialize, build infrastructure, and create jobs make for a compelling case, and Canadians' business community has started to pay attention. I even think that our commercial relations could become a dominant aspect of the overall relationship gradually displacing development cooperation as Canada's main activity in Bangladesh. Yesterday, I was informed that Canadian exports to Bangladesh have exceeded $1 billion in 2019 after just the first 10 months of statistics. This is a phenomenal increase and an all-time record. Likewise, Bangladesh exports to Canada for January-October in 2019 already exceed last year's total, setting a new record equally. This is extremely encouraging for me, but I think it's just the beginning. I think that trade should diversify to more sectors and products, and that in addition to trade, we can do better in areas such as investment, infrastructure, science and technology collaboration, financing all of what needs to be built in this country also. One other factor which will help is the change of Canada's travel advisory for Bangladesh. A few weeks ago, the recommendation we had had since 2016 to avoid non-essential travel to Bangladesh has been removed. More Canadians will now be able to visit Bangladesh and come here to work. Canadian businesses do have concerns regarding all the reports of human rights violations, corruption, shrinking space for civil society, lack of freedom of expression. So these are things where we are going to try to increase their comfort level with this country, their understanding of what's happening here. And we're already engaged with government authorities, with chambers of commerce, and I'm confident that a lot of progress can be made. A second area where I see some change, important changes, has to do with education. Canada's popularity is increasing as a study destination for many Bangladeshi families. The number of Bangladeshi students who choose to study in Canada keeps going up. In 2018, the last year for which we have statistics, it reached 6,500 new student visas, which is an increase of 150% from 2014. This is important for us because when these students return to Bangladesh, often with work experience in Canada, and sometimes even a Canadian citizenship, they become ideal partners for Canadian companies seeking partners or employees here in Bangladesh. A group of Canadian university graduates has decided to launch the Canadian Alumni Association in Dhaka, about to be officially created, and I'm convinced that it will greatly contribute to the commercial and academic relations between our two countries. The next logical step when it comes to education would be for our Canadian universities and colleges to become more present and engaged with Bangladesh. Not for student recruitment. I'm talking about partnering with Bangladeshi universities in academic research, for example, in student exchanges, in delivering a joint curriculum locally for students who can't afford to go overseas. This is something that Canada does in many other countries, and I think Bangladesh would be the kind of country where this would fulfill a lot of needs and be useful for the bilateral relationship. The third point I wanted to raise for what I see happening in the future is about the freedom of the media. Last summer, the United Kingdom and Canada co-hosted a media freedom conference in London. It will be Canada's turn to host a similar conference in 2020. Our objective is to bring together governments, journalists, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders to discuss effective ways to address threats to media freedom. We're confident that the conference will constitute a meaningful step against the troubling deterioration in media freedom that's been witnessed around the world. We definitely want to have a large Bangladesh delegation to attend and hope that this will become a new area of focus for the Bangladesh-Canada relationship, because a free and vibrant media encourages creativity, inspires compassion, teaches and helps build the citizens of tomorrow. Promoting media freedom is a key component of Canada's advocacy to strengthen the rules-based international order, democratic resilience, and respect for the right to freedom of opinion and expression. In conclusion, there are many areas where Canada will continue to energetically work with Bangladesh, bilaterally, regionally, internationally. I have identified a few of these today, but there are many, many more. I have also identified some of the challenges, but none of them will deter Canada from approaching the decade ahead with confidence on everything that matters for keeping our two countries peaceful and prosperous. So with this, I shall conclude my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, High Commissioner. That was a very thorough analysis, detailed analysis of the relations between Canada and Bangladesh. As we do on these occasions, and what we ought to do in these occasions also, of course, is to look at the details for the sake of the details also, and also try and posit these against some kind of a theoretical framework so that the extrapolations are relevant in other situations of comparable milieu. I mean, that is the purpose of an academic colloquium. You have, it's truly very good, and I thought this event was well worth waiting for. I mean, you obviously prepped for it with painstaking care and due diligence. So thank you very much for your contribution. We will continue with the talks from this end, and it would be my honor now and great pleasure to give the floor to Foreign Secretary Shahidul Haq, Senior Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Shahid, I've already introduced you, so
Sir,
the floor is yours.
so thank you very much, sir. Let me thank Cosmos for organizing the dialogue. In particular, Mr. Inatullah Khan, who has been a good friend and a support to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the government, and also to my long-time boss and a teacher, Dr. Iftikhar Sir. He has been very kind but very tough boss when he was with us in Geneva. Also, High Commissioner Benoit, we have been interacting, I think, in sector which cannot be truly defined in terms of foreign policy and foreign relations. We have gone beyond the framework and collaborated in areas where normally we do not do, and I will touch upon that. I think, and the distinguished colleagues, and I think High Commissioner hasn't left anything for me to elaborate. So I have a speech which I'll not go through. Rather, I will try and give my reflections. I think our relationship is based on the Canadian support, people's and government support during 1971. I think those were the days where we were looking for friends. We were also been very vulnerable. We were in a difficult situations, and Canada, both the government and the people came to support us, and we remember that. Not only that, Canada was the first country in North America to recognize Bangladesh, and subsequently there was a visit which has been mentioned. I'll not go into that. So if you think of relationship, that's where it started off, and it continued to remain a trouble-free relationship. And some of you senior colleagues who have practiced diplomacy, it is sometimes very difficult to identify a relationship as a complaint-free relationship, and that's what characterizes us in Canada. I think the relationship has always been very healthy, very growing. I'll come back to this, and I'll try and share with you as to why I say it's a trouble-free relationship. Is you know that when the Rana Plaza incident happened, I think that was a very difficult time both for the private sector and the people and the government of Bangladesh. There are few countries who realized that this is an accident, this has happened, and Bangladesh can also come out of it. In those days, some of the discussions that we had appeared that we have done a huge criminal act, and for that Bangladesh has to pay. Canada was one of those countries in the negotiation tried to bring in some rational thoughts into the process, and that's where we also again saw the value of a Bangladesh-Canada relationship. As I said, that our relationship is very healthy, growing, and it also multidimensional. The High Commission has already given the width and breadth of the relationship. I will just touch a few. In terms of trade, business, and investment, I think that is based on a very solid footing. The two-way trade is plus 2 billion now, and in addition to that, we annually receives about $60 million USD remittance from Canada. That's also need to be brought into the discussion. And the stock of Canadian investment in Bangladesh is currently about 125 million. So that is fairly large given the distance that the High Commissioner has been emphasizing. So the trade, business, and investment relationship is solid. There's a lot of potentials. It's also growing. The second area where this leads us to the whole issue of RMG. There are few countries where we get duty-free, quota-free facilities, and Canada is one. And as I say, it's almost a trouble-free relationship. That is the other sector where they do bring in issues which need to be brought in terms of labor rights and wages and other things, but there's a huge rationale into their approach, which often we do not see in some of the other countries, and that actually helps the government to push some of these frontiers. The other area where I think we work very closely is multilateralism. And currently, the multilateralism is coming under questions by those countries who actually founded this and told us that this is something countries like Bangladesh should greatly engage. This will benefit everybody, and now the history they are saying that this is not serving anyone purpose, in particular theirs. So in that environment, I think Canada brings in again a rational thinking that not everything multilateral is bad, especially for countries like Bangladesh. And in that, I think Canada and Bangladesh works very closely. Two areas that High Commission has already mentioned. One is the climate change, and you know that Bangladesh continue to remain on the forefront of the climate change because of the vulnerability that we face. And we have again brought the chairmanship of two countries forum, or climate vulnerability forum, back to Bangladesh from the Marshall Island. It started off with Bangladesh, went to Maldives, went to Marshall Island, and came back to Bangladesh. That's an area where we closely cooperate. And the other one is the migration. Canada has, despite the fact coming from a continent where there's not much of a faith on the multilateral way of dealing with migration, Canada has always been on the forefront of approaching migration from a multilateral point of view. And there, not only on the compact, but also compact for refugees and compact for migration, Canada came in very supportive of of some of the things that Bangladesh floated in both the platforms. And in the same go, I will also share with you our relationship in the whole humanitarian sector. Let's broaden it from the Rohingya crisis and look at humanitarian field, where Canada has always been very active, and so is Bangladesh. Whether it comes from participation of women in the peacekeeping or peace building institutions that grew up from almost nothing to a big component of the whole peace approach to the issue. So in the humanitarian diplomacy, we have found Canada to be a very close friend of Bangladesh, and not only that, also for the people who are vulnerable and need support globally. On the Rohingya area, I think it has been an exceptional relationship, not only in terms of helping Rohingyas in terms of their basic needs, but also on the whole issue of accountability track. I cannot share with you right at this moment everything that we are doing together, but I can assure you that we are a team on the whole accountability track. We are closely working, and it will sort of give you a sense where from Canada is coming. Canada is possibly second or third country or group of countries decided that a gross violation of human rights has taken place in Myanmar, and Canada needs to act. And they acted very decisively in 2018, including passing a very strong resolution in the Senate, and subsequently taking away or revoking the honorary citizenship to Aung San Suu Kyi for her role in gross human rights violation against Rohingya people. I think that was very decisive, very significant, and very encouraging decision by the Senate in Canada. And so it was beyond lip service. That's what I want to mean. Not only that, in fact, the Canadian government also wrote a letter to the UN Security Council suggesting that Security Council should refer the Rohingya issue to the ICC. Although it didn't happen, but Canada, and particularly the Special Representative on Myanmar issue, Bob Rae, has been very instrumental in the accountability track. In fact, yesterday the mission, the High Commission and the Foreign Office sat down on a weekend trying to find out how best we can collaborate in coming days in Hague, where we'll be leaving for tomorrow. So that's area, but it is not only in Rohingya issue, but similar issues Canada has been very forthcoming, and that is why I think Canada for the first time showed a different track, both in the refugee debate and the climate change debate and in the migration debate. Took a very human approach, and I'm sure it was not easy for Canada either to say things which has to be said, and it may have costed a little bit of a price for them, the way it is costing us. So that's the third area. The fourth area is the defense. The collaboration in the defense area in terms of training, in terms of peacekeeping, in terms of defense purchase is small, but it's growing, and we are increasingly looking at Canada and some of the European countries in terms of strengthening our defense purchase and defense collaboration, where there is a huge progress. One area where High Commissioner has touched, and I will flag it, because I am often confronted with that, often attacked by my senior colleagues, both from the defense forces and from the civil colleagues, for not being able to get due services from the government of Canada in terms of visas. So that's an area we know, and High Commissioner, I don't want to deal with it here, but I can assure you that the Canadian High Commissioner in the government has been very responsive to our request. They are looking at, despite the fact this is their sovereign right, not to issue or ought to issue visa to a non-national, and also because of their act which they have, they are duty bound to apply on every and each individuals and to nations. So that's an area where we see things need to be done. High Commissioner has also hinted on the evolving world order, and I think I'll end with the geopolitics, and often I hear in the negotiations that and also the narrative that I see coming out of some of the discussions, that Bangladesh is a significant country in South Asia, which I haven't heard 2 years back, and it's coming from very important countries. Bangladesh is a significant country, or some say significant force in South Asia. In fact, I say that Bangladesh matters. Bangladesh matters both in terms of demography, in terms of market, in terms of its geopolitical location. So on 3 accounts, Bangladesh matters, and I think there are more and more recognitions in terms of Bangladesh is a significant force in South Asia. We are also eagerly monitoring the evolving world order, both in the context of new alliances that we see in the process of building up. One is the Indo-Pacific strategy, the other one is Belt and Road Initiative, and the third is the Euro-Asia corridor or space that gradually coming into force, faced with the two polarized debate. And that's why European Union has come forth and said that in addition to our alliance role, in addition to our role to our member states, we have also a global role to make sure that that the world doesn't disintegrate and gets into a chaos. And so they have come out with a number of European Union in terms of the old Euro-Asia construct. We are yet to see a well-articulated leading role of Canada as a friend of developing country, a role in the whole new evolving world order. I think that's where we would like to see Canada bringing in some balanced thinking into the world order. And in the past, they have always played a role, although they have played a role along with others, but this time possibly they would also play a little more balanced role. I do not want to go beyond this, but that's why often we wonder that despite its huge presence in global politics, why it is yet to come out with either the new ideas or contribution to the evolving geopolitics. I think that will bring in more convergence into the thoughts and into the order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary, for those truly excellent remarks. You have done exactly what the chair had presumed ought to happen in situations like this. You have taken these details of course, bilateral relations, and then you have sought to put them against the backdrop of the world order. In other words, how Bangladesh-Canada relations impact on the current existing international relations in the world across regions. I should also like to place on record at this stage my great appreciation of the fact that your support, Foreign Secretary, of course, and also that of my colleagues or former colleagues, once colleagues never cease to be colleagues, of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I've noticed that in these Cosmos Dialogue discussions, we have always had a sizable representation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and that is what these occasions ought to be, an interaction between think tankers, influencers or thought leaders of policies, and those who actually create policies and execute them. At the same time, I'm beholden to very senior members of our diplomatic corps, people who have been foreign secretaries in themselves, who have been ambassadors and high commissioners in the most key countries in the world, are here to support us, to encourage us, and I wish to thank you all, some of whom are also my senior colleagues. So with these words, I will actually open the floor to our participants, our friends of Cosmos, again looking at a situation where these kind of interactions will sort of create a synthesis of ideas for us to take away from. And I begin by recognizing Ambassador Shamim Ahmed. High Commissioner Shamim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, my warmest thanks to Ambassador High Commissioner of Canada for an excellent presentation on Bangladesh-Canada relations. We are aware of Canada's important role in international issues, their contribution, and I would particularly recall Canada's very vital role in having this anti-personnel landmines banned internationally. I mean, possibly it was a Canadian lady, Jody Powell or somebody's. And then my question with regard to Bangladesh-Canada relations would relate to your visa issuance system. As far as I know, you don't issue visa in Dhaka. They are processed in a third country mission, possibly Singapore. I mean, why is it so, and how long do you think this practice would continue? Because it's not so of course not in India, and my last post was in Pakistan. You didn't have that thing there. So will it continue, this issuance of visa from a third country mission for some more time? Is it because of shortage of manpower or any other reason? Thank you.
Yes, with pleasure. You're absolutely correct. For several years now, the visa office responsible for all Bangladeshi visas has been located in Singapore, where they are in charge of multiple countries, 5 or 6. I am told that at the time the decision to relocate over there was linked mainly to the fact that a lot of the process for the visa issuance had been turned into an electronic process. And so therefore having enough bandwidth to process everything quickly became a key. In our High Commission here in Bangladesh, our Wi-Fi, not the Wi-Fi, but the broadband connection was too weak to accommodate all the work that needed to be done. We would have had to multiply by 10 the number of employees, and was so slow. And so this was the main reason why they relocated. I do not know right now what the speed of the broadband is, but what I do know is that there are a lot of people calling for a return of the office here, raising it with me, raising it with my ministers who visit, or in Canada, that it would greatly simplify things. So I do not know how much it would simplify or speed up. The reality is that our visa processing system is the same for every country. Doesn't really matter where it happens. And one thing I must make sure you all understand, it has nothing to do with my ministry. We do not even get to know who is applying, who's being rejected, who's being accepted, because of our laws which protect private information. So it's very difficult for us. We learn more by speaking to Bangladeshis who go through the process than what we can hear from our own government. What I would say is that this is something I was thinking about discussing in my remarks. Should I have a section about mobility of people? I spoke about removing our travel advisory so Canadians come here can come here more easily now. But I think there's also a need to make it easier for Bangladeshi people who have relatives in Canada, who have valid purposes to go there, to quickly and easily be able to receive visas. I do not want to give the impression that I am critical or unsatisfied with what my colleagues in Singapore are doing. My understanding is that what is happening for Bangladeshi applicants is very similar to what happens for Singaporeans or Malaysians or Indians who get to apply in India, a country where we have a visa office. Rejection rates are the same, the time it takes. So moving the office here might not have much of an impact. What matters and what I am discussing with my own government, with Bangladeshi partners, is how could we find ways to streamline, to avoid mistakes, to have a recourse when something went wrong, to make it more transparent how all of this works. And so this is an area where we still have a lot of work to do, and where I almost included a section in my remarks. My prognosis for the future will likely include some facilitation or improvement. I do not know if that would mean an office coming back here for visas. This was a decision that would be made in another part of my government. But certainly we are looking at options and looking at what is done in other countries where Canada faces the same situation with lots of complaints on visas.
This is a very important subject, and I believe almost everyone around this table would be interested in this. Eventually after this bilateral situation, we will probably come into agreements with Canada, as we have done with many other countries, and I watch this very carefully from Singapore. In these agreements, the question of movement of natural persons under Mode 4 of the WTO will feature. And someday we will have a more sophisticated way of looking at how professionals can also travel between countries like Canada and Bangladesh. Now, I have, as I said, in groups of three, I'll give the floor. Selina Mohsin, Admiral Awal, Masood Khan, Nahar Khan, Ambassador Tawhid Hussain. So far, but first three will go as Ambassador Selina Mohsin and Admiral Awal, then Mr. Masood Khan.
Kate Preston was director of PSU when her husband was High Commissioner, and she had asked me to help her in program support unit of the Canadian International Development Agency. At that point, I found that many Canadians were brought from Canada to Bangladesh who had naturally little knowledge of the country. So Bangladeshis were recruited experts to help them. And most of the experts were good, but some of them were recruited, I do not know for what reason, because they were either helpful or did not create a good impression. Another point is Canada is very popular now with everybody regarding education, migration. Although I feel it is an Arctic country. It is a beautiful country. I like it, but I do hope, as my colleague earlier stated, that we have better technological innovation so that the visa process could take place from Bangladesh instead of from a third country.
Now, you asked about why Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is so popular in Bangladesh. I can flag a few. He is charming, definitely. Then his articulation on various values, which is very popular. And the third one is, whenever he has anything to do with the elephant, it makes news. And the last NATO summit is another one. Now, my question is on, as Foreign Secretary has mentioned, about the Euro-Asian corridor. Now, departure of your earlier Foreign Minister, Chrystia Freeland. She has been elevated rather But the new foreign minister, what's his name, Francois Philippe, now he's coming in. He's seen as a, Canada's approach towards Euro-Asian, pro-Euro-Asian policy. So does it have any substance, or I just read some report that between these two, departure and arrival, there is for Canada, it will have more emphasis on the pro-Euro-Asian policy, particularly in the context of China. The Chinese ambassador has been appointed very quickly. Then your ambassador has also gone. Given all this, is it something to do with the Euro-Asian policy or not? Thank you.
Good morning. As a Canadian Bangladeshi, in fact, today's dialogue was very relevant for me and very interesting. One thing I would just like to maybe just kind of point out is that I think one of the reasons, a few reasons why Bangladeshis are so drawn to Canada, I think is because of their health sector, the education, and also safety. And I think Bangladesh now is a fast-growing country. I think can take it to these three, take these three categories into serious consideration for the continued growth. I have two questions. One question I have is a little specific. That is, does Canada have a position on the International Tribunal case on The Hague involving some senior Myanmaris who stand accused of human rights violation? And my second question is, Bangladesh exporting over 1 million worth of goods to Canada, but it's not very diverse. So my question is, how can we diversify the export instead of having just one or two?
I will begin with the comment by Selina Moasa. We no longer have a post-support unit for our High Commission. It's now been converted into something called FSS, which is a private sector bidding system where we have additional resources available to help us with our development projects. But your point is well taken. There have been generations of Canadians, both the diplomats, but also what we call cooperants, or Canadians who come here from NGOs, from academia, to contribute to projects, to work in Bangladesh. We have almost none of that left today, in part because of our travel advisory, but also because of the way we transformed our approach to international development, which relies much less on Canadians, Canadian suppliers, Canadian organizations. Now it's totally unlinked. It's very rare to see any Canadian product or Canadian person involved in everything we fund in Bangladesh. Because we want to make it clear, our aid, international aid, is not linked to Canada. We're not doing it for our benefit to win projects. And so this is one important distinction. But I have to say, in some ways, we miss the days when around the world we had post-support units played a great, important role for us. You also mentioned the visa processing, and acutely aware that a lot of people feel the way you do. Every time this message reaches my government, it's helpful. I think there's a realization in Canada now that it's becoming an irritant in our relationship. But at the same time, these are the kinds of changes that can't happen overnight. So I'm not optimistic that anything will happen this year or next year, but it's a process. And the more information and voices there are, the more we might be able to influence something. Personally, I think with the population Bangladesh has, with the volume of visas being requested in this country, I think this is a place where we should have a visa office. The volume itself justifies it. But unfortunately, it's not my jurisdiction, so I have to be careful what I say. Admiral, I thank you very much for your kind reasons for why my Prime Minister is, I can add to the long list, popular in Bangladesh. Your question was about how Canada sees the various corridors, connectivity, the different ways countries in this part of the world are having to decide how they will build their infrastructure, connect with each other. This is an area where our government has not said much. The truth is, we think each country should pursue their national interest. Their, competition works usually if there's various ways of planning how you will build your infrastructure and develop your economy and connect. It's healthy that you consider all the options. For us, what matters the most is that all of this be done, especially for a country such as Bangladesh, which is democratic and where transparency is important, and with rules for procurement done in a way that is always transparent enough and in line with regulations. Just a small aside, one of the things I am hoping to be able to do during the rest of my tenure here is to also try to speak with Canadian organizations, institutional investors. It's mostly pension funds in Canada. Canadian pension funds, because all of our pension money is paid in advance, so they have trillions of dollars to invest. In countries like India, for example, there's a lot more Canadian pension fund investment than World Bank or BRI or whatever. We're a big player. Our pension funds are very active in South America, in Southeast Asia, in India. And this is one thing I'm exploring. When I talk about trying to raise the comfort level of the Canadian business community, I include our pension funds because I'm hoping that one day they will play the same kind of role they play in other parts of the world in financing infrastructure projects, in purchasing infrastructure projects, in operating them. And Bangladesh is one of the few places where they are not present yet. So to summarize, and I was here at the Cosmos Ambassador Lecture Series when the Australian High Commissioner was explaining that BRI, Asia Pacific, we're neutral. And that's what when I ask my government, do we have views? It's always the answer is we're neutral on that, as long as everything is done according to the law and countries don't end up without realizing in a huge debt trap or something. The third question, actually two questions on the ICJ. What I can tell you is that everything related to the Rohingya crisis, and for which there's a dimension related to accountability. People who caused this need to be held accountable. Canada is very strongly in favor of pursuing all avenues. Right now, the ICJ file is moving quickly. We have just had a change of government. And sorry, I will also speak to our new Minister of Foreign Affairs. We have just had a new government. The ministers were just named a couple weeks ago. We do not yet have any instructions on, do we continue on everything their predecessors wanted, or is there a change? So we're a bit in limbo right now. The Foreign Secretary is aware of this. Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh. But for what it's worth, on the International Court of Justice, my former foreign minister, my prime minister's special envoy have both made some very strong statements on Canada supporting this, and it's in line with what they have been trying to promote for over a year now. So my impression is that Canada will be openly in favor and trying to see how we can help with this process. Regarding the question about whether our new foreign minister, sorry, I forgot about that dimension of your question, our new foreign minister, how he sees things. What I explained earlier about our neutrality regarding the various platforms that are being presented in Asia for infrastructure, connectivity and all that, he has not yet weighed in. And so what I was sharing is our until now, what we were able to say. Our new foreign minister used to be our international trade minister, Minister Champagne. He may have views on this matter, and things might evolve, but as of now we have not heard anything yet from our new foreign minister. And returning to Masood Khan's second question, how can we diversify trade? I think this is the key. And in our discussions with government of Bangladesh, we're both very aware that almost all of the Canadian exports to Bangladesh are food products. And almost all of the Bangladesh exports to Canada are garments. Although, you know, we also sell aerospace, and in Bangladesh there's growing exports of seafood, of leather goods, etc. But it's minuscule compared to the main product. And this is largely because we haven't really made efforts in other sectors. And this is what I mean by having to start to have a dialogue with more Canadians about opportunities in Bangladesh. You know, a few important things have happened in the last year and a half. I mentioned the removal of our travel advisory, but Bangladesh has opened a consulate general in Toronto, which is Canada's main business hub. I already see effects of their role speaking to the business community in Canada, in the number of Canadians who approach us with questions or who travel here. Likewise, we in 2018 have created for the first time ever a position in our High Commission of Senior Trade Commissioner. She's not here today, but she is the first Canadian diplomat who came here, well, maybe the second. I was the first who came here with a background of trade negotiations, investment, and trade, but I don't have much time for that, thanks to the Rohingya crisis, I would say. But our Senior Trade Commissioner is making a big difference, and there had been none until now. She's the one articulating a strategy of how will we change the perceptions in Canada about the market. So I would say this is the first step for us. Everything Bangladesh is doing through its Consulate General in Toronto is extremely useful. Likewise, we are trying to mobilize our network to get more happening. And this is why, as I said when I was speaking about my prognosis, the number one thing that's going to happen is that commercial investment and business-related developments will overtake development cooperation in our bilateral relationship. If Canada hopes to make a difference in your country's development, in creating jobs and all that, it's our private sector who will do that much more than additional funding for projects.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good sub-discussion, of course. Important ideas came up before I give the floor to the next group. Now, infrastructural projects, these initiatives, the problem is that these are hugely costly and expensive. The Asian Development Bank has found out that Asia requires $1.3 trillion every year for infrastructural projects. Now, no single donor, development partner, or country would be able to come anywhere close to providing those kind of resources, except one or two very principal actors. Earlier on, I was talking to the UK High Commissioner on a conference that I have been to recently in Astana. It's called the Astana Club Conference. Astana is situated in the heart of Central Asia, and it's the hub of all these connectivity projects. And there they take these very, very seriously. Now, one of the things that is happening with these massive projects is that it is eroding regionalism in countries, because China coming up with the BRI, and Ambassador Iftikhar Karim told me a little while earlier, that this is seen as the biggest project initiative by anyone in the 21st century, which is, of course, received wisdom. But the point I'm making is that these are having very significant impact on the international relations, because these are eroding regionalism, because these are connecting different regions with huge amounts of money and all that. Yes, problems will occur, as you have mentioned, the problem of indebtedness. There is a fear and apprehension. You are probably thinking about Hambantota and Sri Lanka, that these may create indebtedness which countries may find an excessive burden. But one will have to muddle through, because these are needs, and these are requirements, and these are happenings in the international situation that will not alter. Now, my next group of speakers I'll begin with Ms. Nahar Khan of Cosmos, former Foreign Secretary Tawhid Hussain, and Group 4 head Salim Chaudhry. These three.
Excellency, I'm Nahar Khan from UNB and Dhaka Courier. Thank you for your time today. I'm especially happy to be here, as I enjoy the benefits of also being Bangladeshi Canadian. And the existing bilateral relations between Canada and Bangladesh impact me greatly. My question to you is, how does the recent Canadian election results of a minority Liberal government impact economic policy, specifically for Bangladesh? Because usually in a minority government, negotiations are necessary with other parties with varying policies, specifically the Tories, the Conservatives, in this case. How does this impact economic policy this time around, as opposed to Prime Minister Trudeau's previous tenure, where it was a majority government? Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for your excellent exposure. You mentioned about the reasons why Bangladesh matters. And among those were two. One, the Rohingya issue. The other was prevention of terrorism. I would like to put these two together. Rohingya issue, as we can see, of course, maybe there are certain things which you do not know, as the Foreign Secretary has indicated. There is no, actually, so far, there may be some cases fought in certain courts, but really we don't see a light at the end of the tunnel to the problem to actually be completely resolved. My apprehension is that these people, they are going to remain on Bangladesh soil for quite a long time, 5, 10, maybe more years. The problem is that, why I am saying these two issues to be combined together, because these are the boys and girls, particularly the boys, who are growing up in the situation which is not the ideal situation for young people to grow up. They are not going to accept the realities around them just as it is. They are going to rebel at some stages, we like it or not. And they are certainly going to become a very fertile recruiting ground for existing terror organizations. And who could say maybe new organizations could come up and create serious problems, primarily for us because all said and done, the problem has not so far become really regionalized. It is still a problem of Bangladesh. We know the situation, we know the positions of China, Russia, very clear on the side of Myanmar. To some extent, India also. The West, is generally believed to be on the side of a resolution of the problem, close to similar thoughts as Bangladesh. But their role have been, as we can see it, their role have been very muted so far. What I would like to know from you is that Canada as a country which takes interest in these issues, which is widely respected and has a reputation all over the world as a country that really wants to resolve these issues, humanitarian and otherwise. Could it be possible that some leadership of really making the West more vocal, more forthcoming, and really making some, you mentioned about some sanctions, etc. also, but they are not actually biting. Unless there are sanctions that will be biting on the country and making them really, their life really hard, nothing is going to be accepted by them. We must remember the type of regime that they have. Is it possible that Canada takes a lead whereby brings in the West together to be more vocal and to put sanctions which would be more biting on that country? Thank you.
Dr. Chaudhary, thank you, Mr. Khan, and the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Haq. And of course, Excellency, I have not really a question, my inquisitiveness in asking you. There was a time that CIDA, the Canadian International Development Agency, was very active in Bangladesh, especially in the agriculture sector. These days, I don't see much of activities of CIDA. That was 2-3 decades ago. Very, very active. And there was I think about 25 expats from Canada working for crop diversification program. And I don't see these days much of activities of CIDA. And why is that? This is one question. The other one is just raised by Foreign Secretary Tauhid about the Rohingya refugees. What do you think about General Aziz's visit to Myanmar? Number one. Will you be the Canadian government, the Canadian High Commission in Dhaka, your colleague in Myanmar would be closely looking into it? Number three, a question to Foreign Secretary. Is the delegation of the military backed by any senior diplomats from Bangladesh or retired diplomats at the background? Because the military language would be different. And I think General Aziz's visit to Myanmar is significant, but how much they can break the ice is only depend that how much support they're getting from the Foreign Office, from the old diplomats, senior ones like Tauhid and other gentlemen like Tariq Karim and everything, sitting in the background in the hotel, because this is going to be, apart from the Prime Minister level visit, this is a very significant visit. If you don't break the ice, as Tauhid has said, I was assisted with Rohingyas from 78 from World Food Program. I was the sub-office camp in Cox's Bazar in 78, 79. So I know the situation is going to be that bad, what he said. So this visit of General Aziz should be taken very seriously, and at the background somebody should be working on it, because the generals are not diplomats. They might miss out a lot of things, but they can break the ice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. It was really a very enlightening expose of our relations with Canada. And among the 9 points that you elaborated on, one struck me particularly was the collaboration on the education sector. And I was wondering whether this educational collaboration with Bangladesh can be extended at the tertiary level of educational institutions, because I think that Canadian institutions of education are of a high quality and certainly less expensive compared to the US. For example, it's at least 30% cheaper in Canada than it is in the US. And if there is some kind of a collaborative effort between these institutions, Canadian universities like Queen's or Western or things like that, institutions like that. It would help greatly our students and our young youth, instead of going to Canada, to have that educational facilities available in Bangladesh. That is one area which I was going to ask you about, if it can be looked at. The other was, you mentioned about the travel advisory. Has Canada reverted back, removed the family post thing in Dhaka? And the third is actually addressed to the Foreign Secretary. He mentioned Indo-Pacific region. Was it Foreign Secretary? I think you did. And the BRI and the global role that Eurasia. How do you see this Indo-Pacific relationship, regional cooperation that is developing along and with BRI in the same breath, so to say? I would like you to, if it's possible, to elaborate on
Okay,
that.
thank you. Then, what I'll do is I'll make some remarks on this sub-discussion, sub-grouping, then give the floor to the Foreign Secretary to respond to, I think, 2 points that were addressed to you, certainly this one, and thereafter to you to answer to these queries, and then, if you wish, wrap up. One of the things that both the foreign secretaries, I mean both Tawheed and Shahid mentioned, was urging urging a more active role on the part of Canada. I mean, I think both had similar. So this might be a sort of a sense of the house in Shegul Bagicha, I mean, sense of the house in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, mind you, Canada does have, even though it has not been stated very firmly in any of the global lexicons of international relations, positions on certain issues that have ultimately led to Canadian positions on things like Rohingya, etc., which is the responsibility to protect, the global principle of UN principle of responsibility to protect. Exoverthi and others were very involved with those in the earlier occasions. Alan Rock was a defense minister in Canada for many years, and he was PR also in New York. The idea being that it is the responsibility of every country to look after their population, all parts. If a country is either unable or unwilling to exercise that responsibility, then it will devolve on the international community, who will exercise this working through the United Nations. That is in just the principle. Now, some of these positions of these powers follow from that principle, but not statedly so. But these are also ideas and views that operate in the minds of the policy makers. And we have spoken of, say, in Canada, for instance, consistency in some ways, which is the true in, I would assume, in many Western capitals. So, with that, Foreign Secretary, would you like to react to 1 or 2 points that would have been addressed to you, including the last one?
Thank you very much, sir. I think we'll need a separate session to discuss Bangladesh position on the 3 areas. But I can assure you that we have done recently an exercise, as because we would like to be party to all the initiatives or the alliances that's currently in the making. So your short answer to your question, sir, is that yes, Bangladesh is interested, closely monitoring and remain engaged in all alliances, all 3, to be very precise, alliances that's currently in the process of making in Asia Pacific or in the Pacific, whatever we call it. So that's a short answer. On the issue of education, I think we haven't touched on this. Currently, we are discussing 2 agreements. One in the cooperation in the education sector, the broad umbrella framework that we have submitted to Canada in order to create an environment where our universities could be interested to establish collaboration. The major stumbling block is that our universities, the private universities, yet not ready to to allow off campus. So that remains a big issue in the process. Otherwise, there's a lot of interest also from UK and USA and Australia. And we realize that some of the pioneers who established private universities are yet not feel very. It's like trade protectionism. Feel very strongly about utility of off-campus of those universities. But I think it's a question of time. It will soon go away. And also another agreement that we are currently in discussion is the art, culture, and heritage issues. So these areas are not left out. This is very much in the process of consultations, and also there are some university specific collaboration, especially with the McGill and with Saskatchewan and Ottawa. So I can see in my note there are 3 universities with which currently there's negotiations, but primarily with the government-run institutions, not yet with the private runs, where I think there are more potentials. Thank you, sir.
No, please, let's keep it in order. He must volunteer. I mean, I'm not always exposed to such situations when somebody else is asking for the floor. Mijay, would you like to ask something? Okay. All right.
All that I said, I would not like to be a sponsored questioner. That's all right. But,
thank you.
maybe
High Commissioner? Yeah? Yeah, Ambassador Momin Chaudhary then.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I would like to also thank the High Commissioner and our Foreign Secretary, because both of them together have covered everything and very little are left for us to say. But I would like to add my voice, or my 2 cents as they say, to why people like Canada. The High Commissioner would be very pleased to hear that. Every High Commissioner, every ambassador wants to be praised, his country to be praised in front of them, so he would be no different. I have worked in Canada a long time back, when Justin Trudeau was only 8 years old. And I used to pass through that house on the, I think, Rideau Drive or Sussex Drive, I think. That's an old house, now they're moving out. We like Canada very much. I came from Europe. I came from London to Ottawa. It was a very small city. I think at that time it was not more than, we never had more than 300,000 people, which is now is probably 1 million people now. For 2 reasons. One was that it's a multiracial society, and it was a very open society. People had qualities of both Europe and America. That make Canadians. They were open, like our friends in the United States, and they had also their cultural moorings of Europe at the same time. That make them very special. The other reason was it was a very open society. I mean, it was very easy to get along with. At that time, we didn't know that Canada would one day become, like it is today, a destination of choice for children to go for education. Today, we are asked, when I am asked by friends or families, why should they send their children? One of the places that I always mention is Canada. And then I say go to Australia. I hesitate to say that they go to America, where my 2 children have studied and settled. That makes Canada as a very attractive place for us, for our families, for our children. Many of them have gone there, and all of them have settled down very nicely. They are all enjoying, I would say, a quiet atmosphere. So the High Commissioner would be pleased that this will only attract more and more of our people. One point I just wanted to ask the High Commissioner. You live near a giant, as you say, that the elephant. When we were there at that time, it used to be, if
one country sneezes, the others get the cold. And there was at that time, I think the major issue was the acid rain. I attended a number of seminars in Ottawa, and there the Canadian people were very upset about the industrial belt around their border area, which was sending them the acid rain. But you are a developed country, so is your bigger neighbor. We are also a developing country, and we have also a bigger neighbor. My question is, will you have some advice to people of Bangladesh how to live and survive next to a, if not a giant, a semi-giant? Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for all of you who had some kind comments to do about Canada. And our last intervener is totally correct. I love hearing things like that. I'm thinking of maybe responding to the answer not in the order in which the questions were asked, because there was one question about our travel advisory. I think it was about, and because this is linked to education. So just to be very clear, Global Affairs Canada, the ministry where I work, and which, by the way, now includes the former CEDA, we have a responsibility to give advice to all Canadian travelers to be careful in some countries around the world. Since the Holy Artisan Bakery attack of 2016, there had been on our websites a warning to all Canadians, Bangladesh. It's not same as North Korea, for example, do not go there. It was avoid non-essential travel. And this meant that a university could no longer send its students here, or its professors, or someone to come and speak to students interested in studying in Canada. If they did and something had happened to their employees, they would probably have been sued in court for, hey, government said don't do that, and you send your employees. And so the same thing applies to the business community. How can a company send their employees when our government says don't come here unless you have essential reasons? So it was a huge impediment for a lot of what we were trying to do. I mean, the Canadian High Commission trying to do to build relations, to build people-to-people linkages, and which is why I'm so relieved that this travel advisory has now been removed. Now, this is why we can much more proactively do many things we could not do until a few weeks ago, such as promote education, such as encourage Canadian universities to do something in Bangladesh. And I mentioned a few things I'm interested in: joint research, academic level, student exchanges, maybe develop a joint curriculum that could be delivered here in Bangladesh for students who can't afford to go study in other countries. So these are the kinds of things that had not been happening, largely because of our travel advisory. And so I hope that answers the question on education. Now that this impediment has been removed, we will be much more active on the education front, but not just recruiting students. I want more than that. To come to the question that you asked about our recent election in late October, which resulted in what we call a minority government in Canada. It's not the first time we have this. We have regularly minority governments. And so in this case, I'm not sure what will happen, but based on previous Canadian minority governments, they usually can run the country for at least 2 years, has been our experience. The risk is that if all the opposition parties including the left and the right who don't like each other, if they form a coalition and vote against the government to make them a non-confidence vote, then that could trigger an election. And so this is likely how this government will end, but probably at a time when the government will do something on purpose to trigger this. It won't be a surprise. This is typically what Canada we have seen. So for probably 2 years, we expect the government to govern. One impact is often that there is less international travel, less international involvement by our ministers, because they're focused on, we're going to have to run an election not in 4 years, so, and we need to show that we're addressing the concerns of the citizens. So, you know, these are just very general comments about what a minority government usually means in Canada. And the key usually comes when there is a budget which is tabled by the government. This is what can typically trigger a vote that would trigger an election if the parliament does not support the budget, or else the government cannot spend any money. So right now, I think for at least the first year of this government, other than less ministers traveling around the world, I think there won't be so much change. Although we are waiting to know what, in my ministry, we have a few ministers, they have all changed: international trade, foreign affairs, international development. We're all waiting to know what their guidance for us, what they will change. And so far we have no signals that anything will be changing them. The next question was from former Foreign Secretary regarding the Rohingya crisis. And you're totally right. Everybody we speak with is aware that there are so many young people in that camp. And if they have not much hope, no education, if they are kept in conditions where there's not much else but room for hatred or desire for revenge, which influences them, things could become ugly eventually. Right now, I'm not hearing that there's radicalization or anything yet, but it is something that everybody we speak with in the international community, local NGOs, all the organizations who are active in Cox's Bazar, we worry about how long we can let this go the way it is. This is one of the reasons why my government has been advocating strongly for the need for education in the camps, and whichever curriculum, the Myanmar curriculum, whatever, we need to do a better job at providing something in these camps, and there will be consequences if we wait too long. But definitely it's something that we'll have to manage very closely. I guess we're fortunate that so far there are no signs that things are out of control when it comes to radicalization, but I don't think we can sit on our laurels forever and hope it'll stay that way. The third question came from Selim about CEDA projects. You're absolutely right. There are no more CEDA projects because CEDA has been absorbed entirely. For those of you who don't know, Canadian International Development Agency used to be a distinct ministry in the government of Canada. They now are amalgamated with our Foreign Affairs Ministry and our International Trade Ministry. And there's 3 ministers responsible for Global Affairs Canada. And I spoke to this a bit earlier today. CEDA had been very active in Bangladesh, absolutely, for many years, and they had a big team, and they had the post support unit working with them. They built railways in this country. They did education systems. They were the ones giving out so many scholarships. I meet some of the professors from Bouet regularly, and they tell me that thanks to a CEDA project, many of their professors, engineers, went to Canada, got their master's or PhD degrees, came back to Bangladesh to create the graduate level diplomas that Bouet now has. It used to be just bachelor's degrees. So there's all kinds of things like that that had been done in the past. Now that CEDA has been incorporated into Global Affairs Canada, they continue to be active. Their whole team is in our High Commission, and they are Global Affairs Canada diplomats like me, but they're specialized in development projects. And as I mentioned earlier, the focus for the last 3 years at least has been on what we call FIAP, the Feminist International Assistance Policy. All of the new projects we approve now in Bangladesh, we really want them to make a difference for the women and girls of Bangladesh. And frankly, since we started doing this, we're seeing, wow, this really works. This will really help Bangladesh. This is way better than a lot of the things we're doing better. So I think we're unlikely to change tack. Our Prime Minister is 100% behind this. So this is what we'll continue to do. That being said, when there are humanitarian crises, which are different than long-term development projects, in humanitarian situations, of course, we will be there to try to help whoever needs help. I will reply to this the following way. It's true that we only have one neighbor. You've got two, so you're ahead of us. We only have one neighbor, but we're extremely lucky to have a fantastic neighbor. Yes, we don't always agree on everything, and I think we heard today from you about the acid rains, and all kinds of issues can happen. But no matter what our governments and leaders say publicly, behind all that, there's regular citizens who know each other and are best friends. And not much will change between our countries because of that. Americans come to Canada, they kind of feel at home, and it's the same way when I go to the US. It feels like Canada. And that's the bottom line. Now, what I could say about Bangladesh situation, living next to India, and maybe some of our experiences for how to manage this, because we're 10 times smaller than the US. I think you're kind of 1/6, so the proportions are a bit better for you. But what we've been trying to do with the United States is precisely what I referred to earlier in my remarks earlier, that we have come to the conclusion that for us the ideal scenario is to have a rules-based system in the world. If it's always us alone against much bigger countries, we will never win. But if we can work with all these larger powers to agree on rules, to have agreements that are win-win. Maybe the win is a bit bigger for one of the countries, but it's win-win. This is why it was so important for Canada to have the Canada, US, Mexico free trade agreement. And so I think with India, and I was posted in New Delhi, and I know a lot of the regional challenges when it comes to your regional institutions, and I think there has to be more dialogue, not give up, continue to plead with India that it's in their interest to come to agreements which are win-win, and to optimize all of the aspects of your regional dynamics, whether it's trade, water, environment. A lot of work is left to do there. It's frustrating, it doesn't happen quickly, but it's so important to continue trying. And I'm sure that for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, it's a big priority. Just like for Canada, we have a huge United States relations team because it's so fundamental for our prosperity and our security. And we put most of our resources on that. There was also a question about General Aziz and his visit to who asked, was that was Salim Chowdhury. This is an area where I know General Aziz, I know he's going, but this is something that Canada would not have views on, other than to say the more Bangladesh, as I was saying for India, the more Bangladesh broadens its relationship with its neighbors, the more dialogue there is. Especially in a country where the military have a lot of power, doesn't it make sense to have strong military-to-military dialogue and be able to manage things a bit? I think it's something Bangladesh should continue doing, and without understanding what the dynamics are between the various ministries of Bangladesh, that's probably what Canada would be doing with its neighbors, is sending everybody we've got to try to make friends and understand what the other country is doing, because that's part of the solution.
Now we are coming towards the denouement, gradually the close of the session. It has been an absolutely splendid discussion, dialogue, symposium, whatever way we wish to call it. This actually fits into what Cosmos has seen as the vision, mission, and the purpose of such interactions of the Cosmos Foundation. The idea is to hold these interactions between the government personnel, the policymakers and the executors of policy, the civil society, the academia, the private sector, and the thought leaders, and gradually reach some kind of a conclusion that will not be lost, by the way, because Cosmos will record these deliberations and try to present them in a way that can be absorbed and processed better in the minds of those who are involved. We had some excellent discussions about bilateral relations. We came to the conclusion these bilateral relations take place because as middling powers, both have similar views and interests in the world around us, how the globe must operate. We have talked about the future issues where our interests relate to our sort of theoretical and philosophical positions on global affairs, such as Canada's support for Rohingya issue. Also, I want to place on record the fact of this movement of persons, which will be eventually a very significant matter in global international relations. One of the reasons, as you all probably know, that India did not join the RCEP is because the fear of the other country, the fear that other countries may not accept Indian professionals to enter their workforce, and that did not make up for the kind of market access that India would have to offer for products of the other RCEP countries. With regard to, of course, your point, which is very well taken, that we are going towards a situation, and happily so, that aid is gradually being replaced by trade and investment, and that is the way to go. The reason why CEDA has ceased to work like it used to before is because, not just because Canadian system has changed, because Bangladesh has also evolved. as have many developing countries. Canadian CEDA is going the same way as the Swedish CEDA, which is the other CEDA, and eventually we will have this event with our Scandinavian Nordic countries, and we will see what's happened to NORAD, Danida, and CEDA. Have they gone the same way as Canadian CEDA? With these, I will hand over now to the chairman of the group and foundation, and for your rituals. I believe there are always rituals at the end of it, all which makes it so pleasant for everyone.
Just, I think with each ambassador lecture series, I'm personally finding it more and more rewarding and more engaging, and I think Benoit Pofonte, you have set even a higher benchmark for the ambassador lecture series. I think each and everyone present in this room has enjoyed this discussion and dialogue. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, and for 2020 we have great plans, and like in this morning I mentioned few, but they are more and more interesting. We'll have more distinguished speakers from around the world. Other than the ambassador lecture series, we will have eventually a president's speaker series. So we have many plans, but hopefully 2020 will bring good luck for all of us. And on that note, I would like to thank you once more. So raise your hands and let's give a big